Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, so far today, we've focused on the social and economic side of this coronavirus disaster and the challenge of a lifetime for President Trump. And now we examine the state of our liberty as the federal government gets deeper and deeper into more and more methods of stimulating an economy they fully expect to all but collapse in the days ahead. So it's time to bring on our guardian of individual liberty for the segment which we call Talkin Liberty. Welcome, Scott Cosenza.
Hi, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, so you are Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and someone who keeps an eye on what the ramifications are of government action, and that's never been more important than right now. So let's go through some of the things that are at issue as the country tries to adjust to a period of time like nothing we've ever seen. Martial law. Let's clear the air about what martial law is and isn't, and whether there's any actual danger of the United States falling under martial law.
Well, I'll put the lead out front, and by and large, no, there is no such danger. We keep hearing these things like shelter in place and self-quarantine. There was a story this week out of New York with dueling predictions or directives, one from the governor and one from the mayor, where the mayor says be ready to, I don't know if you use the term shelter in place or self-quarantine, but it gave people the impression that there would somehow be a lockdown. And then Governor Cuomo came out and rejected that notion vociferously. So there is no mechanism in the U.S. Constitution for the imposition of some kind of martial law upon declaration of emergency by the president. That's not a function of the law. The president did declare a state of emergency, and that gives the executive branch certain latitudes and rights under federal law, meaning the body of the federal laws, but not, Tim, under the Constitution. There's no constitutional trigger that has been thrown, and therefore our rights that are granted to us, or more better said, protected under the Constitution, right? They're granted by nature or our creator, as the founders specified in the founding documents, but those can't be abridged simply because the president has declared an emergency.
So, Scott, I want to talk a little bit about federalism and the 10th Amendment and the division of powers and responsibilities of the federal government versus states. Those powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are to be given, according to the Constitution, to the states and the people. Is the proper way to look at the response to this coronavirus disaster that there's really 50 different responses, that the individual states and the decisions of governors are generally the most important for individual people during this time? What I'm saying is that the people of Ohio, for example, are now living under very different rules than the people of California, which are very different from the people of New York or Virginia or Florida.
I think no, that the president here is actually more important, and the reason why, it's not a fun story for most of the legacy media to report on, but most of the problems with this virus and its spread have been governmental. And I don't mean the actions of one individual, Donald J. Trump. I mean all the regulations that frustrate a quick response. The president was on TV talking, Tim, about how the N95 masks that were constructed for construction and industrial use due to a new law that's been passed can now be sold to hospitals. But before, because they weren't so certified, they couldn't be sold that way. Well, so this is, something that government stood in the way. There are things at the state level that can be done. I read a story, Tim, that Pennsylvania was closing their truck stops. Well, the problem with that is, guess who needs the truck stops? The guys driving the masks from Michigan to Florida, right? I mean, he needs to get fuel, he needs to go to the bathroom, maybe get some food. So these are government regulations that need to be knocked down, and they're across the board, but perhaps more federally than at the state level, these sorts of regulations. But there's room across the board, and I think, honestly, Tim, really, we see a dual track here in terms of our dealings with liberty and the response to COVID-19. On the one track, we have these tyrannical impulses, like the stories you read about where the mayor's been given the power to stop gun sales and liquor and seize this and that, right? That's and on the other track, It seems like we're in a world of Atlas Shrugged in the final days where they're knocking down all these preposterous regulations that were erected to appease one person or one interest group.
Right now, people are sort of looking to Donald Trump and the Congress and the government and the agencies and the FDA and the CDC and the NIH to save them. All they can do is, as they ordinarily should, set the parameters so that the private sector can do the job that only they can do particularly well. Now, among the other elements of fallout in this whole crisis is delay of arrests for certain nonviolent crimes due to, I guess, Scott, the need for lack of contact between everybody.
You know, Tim, when the New York City Police Department did that blue flu thing, I think it was in regards to the Eric Garner incident. They were going to refuse to arrest people, except for if they really needed to be arrested. And those of us who are interested in liberty thought, well, hey, maybe you could just implement that kind of strategy all year long, because a custodial arrest is perhaps common for the police, but for those of us who aren't police, it's a radical thing to be arrested, and the impact that it has on the lives of people. And it should only be done really when required. And I just thought that was interesting. The story that I told you about is out of Philadelphia, but I think this is true for a number of police departments. But when we just look at the actual announcement, where people who would normally be arrested and processed at a detective division, they're going to be temporarily detained to confirm their identification and complete necessary paperwork, and then arrested on a warrant at a later date. And then it says decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis based on the severity of the offense, their criminal record, and potential danger to the community. And I just think that screams to me, Tim, why weren't previous arrests made on a case-by-case basis based on the severity of the offense, the perpetrator's criminal record, and the potential danger to the community, right? Wouldn't that be a more sane way to go about deciding who to take off the street and not?
Desperate times require desperate measures, Scott.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, when the dust settles and the smoke clears from this period of time like no other we've ever been through, and the federal government has thrown well over $1 trillion. By the time everything adds up, it'll be well over $1 trillion at this problem. We're going to have to pay the piper one of these days. And one of the things being discussed, it's inevitable, Scott, a tax increase of up to $1 trillion.
Well, I like to talk about it that way because I think no media is talking about it that way. And this is the stimulus spending package. Instead of being billed as a paycheck for you, me, and every other American, we should bill it what it is. It's a giant tax increase that goes to some people. And the bill will have to be paid, Tim, at some point.
Finally, on the matter again of constitutional issues raised by emergency measures taken by the government, student privacy laws. Apparently, they still apply if coronavirus just closed your school, as so many of them have been closed across the country.
We're going to see, Tim, lots of litigation after this, and the president's emergency order doesn't cover, these sorts of deviations from a law like that. This is one of the reasons why it takes so long for a company to maybe produce a face mask or a glove. Like, the legal environment and regulatory environment really do matter.
Well, I think the only solution to avoiding a circus of litigation once all this is done, Scott, would be the Shakespeare solution.
Tim, how dare you?
I didn't say what that was. He might have had multiple solutions, Scott, and I'm recommending one of them. I'm not going to say which, but I think you'll be here next week.
I appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, I think.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, hosted by our own Mark Angelides. All of them available on demand at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and for heaven's sake, stay healthy. See you next time.